I had just come off a brutal triple shift at the hospital, my augmetics aching and my body craving nothing but a quiet evening. It had been an exhausting day, multiple burn victims, chaos from a fire that had swept through the lower levels. The pressure, the constant adrenaline, and the weight of it all were still weighing heavily on me. I was desperate for peace, for a moment of stillness to recharge. But when I pulled into my private vehicle bay, ready to finally relax, I was hit with a wave of frustration. There it was, her damn SUV, parked smack in the middle of my bay like it was her personal parking space. The nerve. I had to fight for every inch of peace in this place, and now she was taking even that from me. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had been nothing but trouble for as long as I could remember. She'd gotten old Manius fined by the HAB overseers for his Grox-hide wind chimes, something that hurt no one but her fragile sensibilities. She'd whispered poison into Supervisor Thorne's ear and delayed young Lyra's promotion to the administratum with baseless accusations about her questionable piety. And as for me, she'd tried to have my workshop sanctioned for excessive noise during hours I was legally allowed to work. She'd made life hell for all of us. Yet here she was, breaking my boundaries again, without a care in the world. That was it. I wasn't going to take it anymore. This time she was going to learn what happens when you cross the wrong person. I stormed to her HAB unit. She emerged before my fist could connect with her door, sunglasses a dark void, that signature smirk already etching itself onto her face. "Excuse me, Karen," I managed, my voice tight as a servitor's restraining bolt. "Is that your oversized land crawler befouling my vehicle bay?" She didn't even blink. "Yeah, it's mine." A beat. She sipped her damned recaf. I felt a vein throb in my temple. "And why, by the golden throne, is it there?" "I parked there," she stated, as if explaining gravity to a child. "I needed the space. Your driveway incline is murder on my suspension, and your bay was empty. You weren't even using it. Be a good neighbor, Jake." My blood pressure spiked. "Be a good neighbor." The same words she'd used when demanding access to my private comm channel because hers was experiencing interference. Oh, this was going to be a problem. For her. "Karen," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl, "this is my property, my sanctum. You can't just commandeer it." She rolled her eyes, a masterpiece of condescension. "Honestly, Jake, don't be so dramatic. I was in a hurry. I'll move it later, when I'm back from my appointment with the Spire stylist." "Later?" I let out a short, sharp laugh that was more snarl than humor. "No, you'll move it now." An exaggerated sigh. "I can't. Just let it be. It's not like the world will end." And with a flick of her meticulously coiffed hair, she turned and sauntered back inside, the door hissing shut behind her. I stood there, seething, my fingers twitching with that perfect mixture of frustration and sheer satisfaction that only a person who knows they're about to make a brilliant, ridiculous decision can feel. The Arbites? Too messy. They'd be in and out like it was their job, and technically it was, but they'd never let me enjoy this sweet, sweet moment of karmic justice. Towing? Nah, too quick, too clean. This wasn't about getting her car off my property. No. This was about the lesson. A lesson in respecting boundaries. A lesson she'd broadcasted she was incapable of learning. So it was time for her to finally learn. I marched back to my bay, every step an act of quiet, petty defiance. My newly installed high-resolution pict recorders, discreetly placed after her last attempt to report my unseemly workshop modifications, were already whirring, quietly recording every second of her impending meltdown. Good. This was going to be fun. I felt like a director gearing up for a showstopper. I grabbed the master control for the bay door, punched in the lockdown sequence like it was some kind of high-tech magic, and bam! The massive plasteel door ground shut with a satisfying thud. It felt like a minor victory. The SUV? Trapped? The woman? Well, I hadn't quite figured out the consequences for her yet, but she'd learn. Then, just for extra flair, I secured the side access panel. I double-checked the mag locks like I was preparing to board up a treasure chest full of bad decisions. There was no way in, no way out, without my express command. No sneaky backdoor escape, no quick pit stops. She was going nowhere until I decided. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence of my perfectly orchestrated trap settle in, the weight of it, the glory of it. For once, I felt like the universe had finally given me a reason to breathe easy. And then, whistling a jaunty little tune I'd heard the Penal Legions sing, a tune I had definitely never expected to find myself whistling, I packed an overnight bag. Just like that, I grabbed my things, adjusted my jacket, and, because why not, checked myself out in the reflection of the control panel. Yeah, I looked good. A little bit of PettyRevenge made me feel like 1,000,000 credits. "She wants to park in my bay?" I muttered, talking to myself like a maniac in a bad sitcom. "Fine, she can stay in my bay. It's the perfect lesson." I hit the door's final lock with a dramatic flourish, enjoying the weight of the decision for all it was worth. I couldn't help but chuckle a little at how ridiculous the whole situation was. But this was going to be a legendary story. It was like a prank gone terribly right. I strolled out of the bay, making sure to lock everything behind me. Then I stepped outside into the open air, breathing deeply, as if I had just stepped out of a prison. My prison. A self-made one, with no bars or locks, but a prison of choices. And today, I had finally taken control of it. I was on my way to the Orbital casino, pre-planned weekend trip, just a little escape. A good, relaxing way to forget that I had just locked some woman in a garage, probably trying to figure out what she had done wrong. Not that I cared about that part, at least not yet, but I did care about the sense of victory in my chest. And speaking of chest, I thought, maybe I'll hit up the high-stakes table, try my luck, let the cards fall where they may. Life had been a bit too boring lately. There was something about taking matters into your own hands that made you feel like you were truly alive. Like a master of your own fate. I sat back in my seat, ready to take the elevator to the Orbital casino, my face splitting into a grin as I imagined her future. The thought of her, stuck in the bay, sitting in her SUV with nothing to do but fume, was glorious. How long would it take her to realize the trap? An hour? Maybe 2? Oh, but this wasn't just about waiting. It was about learning how not to overstep. It was about her being forced to confront the consequences of parking in my space without asking. A few hours passed, then a day. And I was, of course, oblivious. So blissfully unaware, in fact, that it didn't even occur to me to check on her. I was busy, having fun, living my best life at the casino. The lights, the drinks, the buzz. There was something almost soothing about the endless roulette spins. And the poker table? I was cleaning up. No interruptions, just the thrill of high-stakes risk. What was Karen doing? Who knew? Who cared? What I didn't realize, not until later, was that Karen, in her infinite entitlement, had nipped back into the bay to retrieve something from her vehicle just before I'd sealed it. She must have assumed she could just waltz in and out at her leisure. Wrong. The pict-feed, which I reviewed with considerable relish upon my return, told a glorious tale of slow-burn despair. The first few hours she was probably just annoyed, tapping her foot, expecting me to reappear. Then, confusion. Then, dawning horror. The footage showed her yanking at the door controls, useless without my override codes. Pounding on the plasteel, her shouts muffled by the soundproofing I'd installed, ironically to appease her previous noise complaints. By day 2, the Habnet was buzzing. "Anyone seen Karen?" chirped Madame Hestia from Sector Gamma. "Her prized pet Grox is howling like a demon." Young Titus from the lower levels voxed. "Heard a rumor she finally got herself reassigned to a penal colony for excessive officiousness. Good riddance." The gossip spread like wildfire, each comment a fresh twist of the knife in her unseen self-imposed prison. Her husband, Grek, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed at birth, apparently just assumed she was on an extended shopping trip to the upper spire. Inside my bay, Karen was living a nightmare of her own making. The space, usually just for my ground car and tools, became her gilded cage. No comm signal, naturally. My bay was shielded. Food? The pict recorder caught her desperately rummaging through her SUV, finding only some stale protein bars I'd forgotten and, oh, the irony, the dregs of that iced recaf. Water? A single emergency flask in her vehicle's survival kit. The restroom situation. Well, let's just say the pict-feed showed her improvising with an empty ration tin in a way that would make a nurgling blush. It was degrading. It was disgusting. It was perfect. She tried everything. And I mean everything. At first, she honked the horn, like she was trying to summon a magical force that would just whisk her away. She pressed that button so many times that I'm pretty sure she thought she could will the laws of physics to bend to her will. The SUV's power cell was nearly drained by the time she stopped. It was as if she was hoping someone, anyone, would hear the sound of her desperation, run over, and heroically spring her from her self-imposed prison. But nope. Silence. I can almost hear her now screaming her lungs out, "No, this can't be happening to me!" But it was. Her voice echoed through the bay, rising and falling in a crescendo of exasperation. She started off with the typical, "Oh, I'll just shout louder, someone will come to my rescue" method. But when that didn't work, she switched to the, "I'm gonna figure this out with sheer determination" technique. And that's when things got interesting. First, she tried to squeeze through the tiny waste disposal chute. I'm not sure what kind of mental gymnastics she was doing to convince herself that it was a viable option, but I could practically hear her brain working in overdrive, weighing the possibility of this being her escape plan. The chute was clearly meant for oil rags and small debris, not a fully grown woman. But there she was, trying to turn herself into some sort of contortionist. I watched the pict-feed, the clarity of the footage as crisp as the irony of the situation. There she was, stuck halfway through the chute, her body flailing around like a beached land squid. She looked like a fish out of water, but less graceful and far more desperate. It was an absolute comedy show, and I couldn't help but laugh. I was almost tempted to get a snack and settle in. She wiggled and twisted, her limbs moving in unnatural ways. The feed cut out for a moment, and when it returned, she was covered in grime, and I mean covered. The once pristine SUV now seemed to have a soulmate in her, both trapped in their own little messes. After a few more attempts, she finally managed to wriggle herself back to safety, but the process was slow, painful, and filled with a growing sense of humiliation. I watched her take a few deep breaths, like she was mentally preparing for her next brilliant move. And then, she found a tire iron. I watched in morbid fascination as she tried to pry the door open. I thought, oh, this'll be good. This will be the part where she realizes the plasteel isn't exactly going to give way to a tire iron. She swung that thing like a madwoman, grunting with every failed attempt. It was a pathetic effort, exhausting, futile, and utterly absurd. Watching her fight against reinforced plasteel was like watching someone try to break down a brick wall with a wet noodle. Her face was a mixture of determination and frustration, her hands shaking as she pulled and yanked at the door as if her sheer willpower could make the impossible happen. But no matter how hard she tried, the door didn't budge. It just mocked her with its immovable strength. I had to admire her dedication to the cause. If only her energy had been channeled into something productive. After what felt like an eternity, she gave up. She slumped back into the driver's seat, her eyes wild, her chest heaving. The sound of her breathing filled the silence of the bay like an animal caught in a trap. Then she did something I didn't expect. She started talking to herself. At first, it was just muttering, like a person working through their problems out loud. But soon, it escalated. She began to speak to the SUV like it had any say in the matter. "Come on, you can't be stuck here. You're supposed to be a machine. You're supposed to fix this," she whimpered, like she thought the vehicle might respond and give her a way out. When that didn't work, she just stared at the walls. And I watched, fascinated, as her once proud and confident demeanor began to crack. It was like I could see her unraveling. The walls closed in on her, and she could only sit there, defeated. The vehicle, once the symbol of her status, now felt like a sarcophagus, trapping her inside its shiny exterior. Her hands were still shaking, and I watched as she went from angry outbursts to long, silent stares. She kept glancing at the door like it would magically open, as if her thoughts could somehow unlock it. And there I was, a fly on the wall, enjoying this little performance. I'll admit, there was a part of me that felt a tinge of sympathy for her. But then that little voice in the back of my head would pipe up, "She didn't respect your space. She had it coming." And that was that. I leaned back in my chair and watched as her despair deepened, the irony of the situation becoming too much to ignore. She's trapped. I'm out here living my best life at the Orbital casino. This is too good. I kept checking the feed because, why not? And it was honestly like watching a reality TV show you didn't realize you were binging. Her desperation reached its peak when she started talking to the vehicle again. Come on, please. I'll do anything. Just help me get out of here." But the SUV didn't answer. It sat there, quiet, unmoving, and utterly indifferent to her plight. At this point, I was practically holding my breath for the next twist. What would she do next? Would she try to break the windows? Maybe set fire to the whole thing? I was almost disappointed when she didn't take it that far, but I suppose some people have limits. And then the silence came. The sound of her desperation fading away. She was just sitting there, defeated, in her shiny little cage. The vehicle, once a symbol of her power, had become her greatest enemy. Meanwhile, I was sipping a cocktail, absolutely loving the chaos I had orchestrated. And as I thought about my little weekend trip to the Orbital casino, I couldn't help but smile. She wanted to park in my bay. She got a little more than she bargained for, and I had a feeling this was going to be one hell of a story to tell when I got back. Meanwhile, I was enjoying the zero-G ballet at the casino, utterly unbothered, until my personal Vox link chirped, an unknown frequency. "Help me, you monster!" it shrieked, the voice distorted but unmistakably Karen's. She must have found a tiny, intermittent crack in the shielding. Another message. "You locked me in, you psychopath! I'll have you flayed for this! Let me out!" I smirked, took a sip of my vintage Amasec, and put the Vox link on silent. As she'd so wisely advised, I was being a good neighbor. She could wait. A week later, feeling refreshed and significantly wealthier, I returned. As I keyed open the vehicle bay, the heavy door groaning upwards, Karen shot out like a bolter round, a feral, wild-eyed creature, hair-matted, clothes-stained, reeking of desperation and stale nutrient paste. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a raw croak. "You did this! You imprisoned me! I'll see you dragged before the Inquisition! You'll be purged!" I just stood there, sipping a freshly acquired chilled recaf, mirroring the one she'd left on her hood a week prior. "Well, Karen," I said, my voice calm, almost bored. "Looks like someone had an eventful little staycation. Did you enjoy the amenities?" Her face contorted. "I'm calling the Arbites! You're finished, Jake! Unlawful confinement!" "Go ahead," I said, pulling out my data slate. "In fact, let me save you the trouble." She paused, a flicker of uncertainty in her rage-filled eyes. Why wasn't I panicking? I tapped the screen of my data slate, angling it so she could see the crystal-clear pict-feed. "Funny thing, Karen, I installed some enhanced security measures a while back. You know, for insurance." The footage played, her arrogant dismissal, her turning her back. And then, the crucial part, her, clear as day, sneaking back into the bay after our conversation, just moments before I sealed the door. "So, you see," I continued, my voice silky smooth, "technically you trespassed, refused to vacate, and then, well, you incarcerated yourself. I simply secured my property before leaving for a trip, unaware of your subsequent activities." Her mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a sickly pallor. "And those delightful little Vox messages you sent?" I brought them up. "Help me, you monster! You locked me in, you psychopath!" I raised an eyebrow. doesn't exactly paint a picture of someone who was briefly, accidentally detained, does it? Just then, as if scripted by the Emperor himself, her useless husband Grek pulled up, his face a mask of mild confusion. "Karen? There you are. Been wondering where you got to. The HAB Overseers Assembly sent a notice." Karen whirled on him. This maniac locked me in his vehicle bay for a week, Grek." Grek looked from her, to me, to the damning footage still playing on my data slate. He slowly rubbed the back of his neck. "So, why were you in his vehicle bay to begin with, dear?" That was the moment. The utter, beautiful collapse. I clapped my hands together. "Well, I won't be pressing charges with the Arbites. Consider this a learning experience. But the universe, or perhaps just the long-suffering HAB Overseers Assembly, had one final twist of the knife. As Grek fumbled with the official-looking datapad he was holding, a notification pinged on Karen's own grime-covered device. She stared at it, her face crumbling. A hefty fine from the HOA, her old stomping ground, for unauthorized long-term appropriation of private property, creating a neighborhood disturbance, howling pet groks, and conduct unbecoming a resident. And the kicker? Due to her past history of leveraging HOA regulations for personal grievances and this current flagrant violation, her community privileges, access to the communal gardens, priority water rations, even her coveted position on the decorative servitor maintenance roster were revoked for a full solar cycle. The very institution she'd once wielded like a power maul had turned around and smacked her flat. I gave her a little salute. "See you around, Karen. Try to be a better neighbor." She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just sort of deflated, a punctured gas bag of arrogance, and allowed Grek to steer her away, defeated. I watched them go, then turned back to my pristine, Karen-free vehicle bay, a grin stretching across my face. The Emperor's justice takes many forms. Sometimes it's just a well-locked door and a high-definition pict recorder.